welcome to the Dementia Researcher podcast, brought to you by University College London and the NIHR in association with Alzheimer's Research UK, Alzheimer's Society, Race Against Dementia and the Alzheimer's Association, supporting early career dementia researchers across the world.
Welcome to the Dementia Researcher podcast, bringing together early career researchers and leaders within the field to discuss their research, hot topics, and to share career tips. I'm Dr. Gaia Brezzo, a postdoctoral research fellow at the Dementia Research Institute at the University of Edinburgh, and it's my pleasure to be the co-host of today's episode. My research aims to understand how and why stroke causes cognitive decline and dementia in some individuals, with a specific focus on the role of the immune system and how we can manipulate this immune response to promote cognitive resilience. My co-host today is Mila, a PhD student that works with me. Mila, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Mila Redzic and I'm doing a PhD at the University of Edinburgh where I'm researching microglia, which are the main immune cells of the brain, and how they respond to periods of hypoxia. So brain hypoxia or the lack of oxygen occurs during cerebrovascular disease such as stroke, and we also believe in some cases where the vascular dysfunction might be more subtle but more prolonged, which could lead to dementia. And what we think is really important there is the immune response that's associated with this hypoxia. And we think that understanding it better might help us manipulate it to promote brain resilience. So today we will be discussing the importance of lived experience in research, and we will chat about the journey of recovery from a stroke and also the challenges of caring for someone who's had a stroke, and importantly, how we as researchers can interact with people with lived experience and vice versa to kind of bring our expertises together.
So we're thrilled to be joined by two amazing guests. So we have Denis, who is a stroke survivor, and his daughter Maise. So without further ado, let's meet our guest.
Thank you very much, Gaia. I'm Denis. I'm a stroke survivor. It is almost 4 years to the day that I had my stroke. And if somebody had said to me 4 years on when I was in intensive care that I would now be sitting, working and supporting dementia researchers, and also I am providing a voice of lived experience along with others working with the Scottish Government, I would have thought they were not telling the truth. But here I am. I'm a stroke survivor and carry some of the scars of that stroke. And we will no doubt carry these into the discussion going forward. And this is Maise.
Hi, I'm a nurse. I graduated from Edinburgh University 3 years ago, and now I work in the Department of Clinical Neuroscience in Edinburgh. So we see stroke survivors and people who've just had strokes, and you can see their progression as well, which is quite nice throughout our department.
And she also claims to be my daughter.
And that too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Denis and Maise. And just before we delve any deeper, I'm very conscious that this is the Dementia Researcher podcast, so maybe not all the listeners are aware of all the links between stroke and dementia. So Gaia, you're the resident expert. Could you tell us a little bit about what we know at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. I'll try not to disappoint, as I've been named a resident expert. I don't claim to be, but I'll do my best. So just to start us off with a short introduction on what actually is stroke, in case some of our listeners are not as familiar with the topic. So there are two main types of stroke. We have ischemic stroke, which is the most common. So actually 85% of all strokes in the UK are ischemic. And then there's hemorrhagic stroke. Ischemic stroke happens when blood supply to the brain is cut off from our blood vessels, for example, from a clot, which might have dislodged from the heart, which ends up killing the cells that are surrounding that vascular network due to hypoxia. Whereas hemorrhagic strokes, which make up about 15% of all strokes in the UK, are caused by a bleeding within or around the brain. And there are different causes that can lead to both ischemic and hemorrhagic strokes. For example, arteriosclerosis, which is the narrowing of blood vessels from plaques or atheromas, or heart conditions like arterial fibrillation. Another cause that is very close to both mine and Mila's heart is small vessel disease. So this is the narrowing of the very, very tiny blood vessels within the brain. And small vessel disease has actually been linked directly with dementia and cognitive decline. And this narrowing of these tiny blood vessels can sometimes block them. So this could lead to strokes happening a lot more often or more likely to happen. In terms of what we know about cognitive impairment and stroke, we know that this occurs most commonly in the acute phase of stroke. And we see it in patients just after their stroke, once they've recovered from that acute phase. But over half of all stroke survivors actually do experience a long-term form of cognitive impairment or cognitive deficit. And this is really the aim of my research, to understand why some individuals go on to develop these long-term deficits that then progress into dementia. We know that the inflammatory response plays an active role in resolving the damage after stroke, but the immune system, if it stays active, it could actually lead to more damage. So a prominent hypothesis in the field is that this unresolved inflammatory response from the cells of the brain that fight the stroke damage basically become activated and then create these maladaptive immune responses that compromise long-term recovery. So looking at functional recovery as well as integrity of brain structures that are left. And this could then lead to cognitive decline and dementia in about 30% of stroke survivors within a year of the stroke onset. But now let's actually hear more about what stroke and stroke recovery, directly from one of our guests. So Denis, would you be happy to tell us about your stroke? For example, like when it's happened, some of the symptoms of onset, from yours and Maise's perspective as well, that would be great. And also if you received any treatment when you got taken into hospital.
Okay, thank you. My stroke was, as I say, the 28th of March 2019, and it was just after I had gone to bed in the evening. My wife thought there was something wrong, and she queried it, and within a minute I had become FAST positive. FAST is what is used in the UK to describe the symptoms of stroke. It is facial weakness, arm or leg weakness, the inability to hold both arms out if one falls. The S is for speech, whether it be slurred or it is dysphagic. And also the T is then time to get the emergency services. In the UK, this stands for dialing 999, but it is to get ambulance or medical help. So I was FAST positive, and the family immediately called the ambulance. I was taken in under blue light to the hospital, where I was given CT scans and tested for swallowing. All the symptoms of stroke were there. So as it turned out, I was within the right time scale for thrombolysis. By the time of my stroke to the admission of the drugs, it was within the 4.5 hour window. So I had thrombolysis, and even within 10 minutes of the hour of getting that pumped into my veins, I'd very much got better physically. The arm and leg weakness had disappeared, as had the facial droop, and the speech was on its way back. From that, I was then taken up to intensive care for overnight and into the stroke unit. But I was actually released from hospital within 40 hours and sent home. Subsequently, there has been some work. They discovered I had asymptomatic atrial fibrillation, so I've had ablation to correct the AF within my heart. But actually, my doctor was kind of offhand and said, "Oh, if I had a list of patients who I thought would have a stroke, you weren't very high on that list, Denis." And it was things like that. And I have actually never seen a stroke nurse. there are a lot of things now that I've learned that I should have been speaking to the stroke nurse about. But I'm sure that Maise will tell you about the aspects of home care that weren't about the physical side of stroke, but were about the emotional and the other effects that can happen through stroke. So Maise, you can be as honest as you like.
Yeah. Well, I would say definitely very tired, more grumpy as the day goes on. We're a very sarcastic family. Me and my brother and sister, we always wind each other up, very sarcastic. My dad doesn't understand that sarcasm anymore. He goes from 0 to 10, but like shouting at us to stop, where we're just like having fun. Like it's when you're talking to him, he can sometimes sound very blunt and not responding to your tone. He's completely different in his tone. But it's kind of like you know he doesn't mean it in that way that he's saying it, but it comes across quite brutal. And what else?
How's my practice of door slammings improved?
Coordination is not very good. We were walking down to the rugby last week and walked into a few doors, fell off a few curbs. Especially when you get tired, your coordination and balance goes out the window. You can definitely tell when Dad is tired because his speech goes, he gets quite slurred speech, and just walking becomes quite a chore for him. And even just postural, you kind of lean forward, trying to keep yourself upright. But other than that, you seem to have covered. It's always just these things that when you get tired, these are the things that just creep up.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you both so much for sharing that experience. It obviously goes without saying, it sounds completely life-changing. And so, yeah, we really appreciate you sharing that with us. And just to kind of follow on from that, both Denis and Maise. So, you know, a lot of people that research stroke or even the public would think that you would be left with some sort of physical disability. I know, Maise, you touched on coordination, which obviously goes into kind of a motor realm. But, you know, a lot of people might still be left with an arm or a leg weakness or a facial weakness. And we could probably say that that hasn't been your case, Denis, if I'm correct in saying that.
Sorry, absolutely. I'm very blessed that I was the right time to get thrombolysis. The figures are there are around 9 million people in Europe living with physical disabilities from stroke, and I am very blessed that I am not one of them, but I still know that I've had a stroke. There are times I'll meet people for the first time, and they go, and I mention about being a stroke survivor, and they go, "Oh, you don't look like it." No, but I know I am.
Yeah, no, for definite. And I probably should have maybe mentioned for people who are not familiar. So the treatment that Denis received is basically something that dissolves the clot that it's in, been embedded into his blood vessels. Obviously, this would then restore blood flow and allow that brain area to be reflooded with new oxygen and nutrients that have been carried into the blood. And as Denis mentioned already, there's a very short window for people to receive this treatment. So there's not a lot of people, unfortunately, that can benefit from this. I've had a stroke, and just to emphasize that we definitely need more treatments for this, because they're few and they have very specific windows which can be acted on. And this is a big area of research that is going on to try and find therapies that can definitely have a broader spectrum of when it can be acted on.
Sure.
One of the things that the stroke charities in the UK, as well as the government, are trying to promote is the FAST, the facial droop, the arm and leg weakness, the speech. And if you see any of these symptoms, then it is time to get somebody to emergency service. I'm very fortunate that although I was in bed, I was still awake at the time. If I had gone to sleep and woken up 4 hours later with a stroke, then I wouldn't have been a candidate for thrombolysis because they wouldn't have known whereabouts in that time scale they were. And that 4.5 hours is really important for trying to make the best outcomes for stroke survivors, where it reduces the physical disabilities that can be affected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as Gaia mentioned, the motor component of it in physical disabilities in research as well, we often use it, I guess, as a readout of if something's worked or not, and that's where we focus when we speak about stroke recovery. But I know, based on what you just told us and from our previous interactions, that you didn't perhaps have as much of the motor impairment, but that you had some other areas where you struggled a bit more with. So I was just wondering if you could maybe share a bit of that with us and kind of comment on how you feel when, things like that happen, when people are like, oh, yeah, you don't look like you've had a stroke. And is there some other area you'd like us to focus more on?
I think for me, it's as somebody who's heading towards their mid-60s, I've had to learn new emotions for the first time in 50 years. We always think that teenagers are the point where you learn new emotions. Well, I've had to learn with anxiety. I've had to learn how to try and cope with anxiety. I still don't have that one quite right yet, and that puts strains on your family. The emotional side of stroke. I can sit and be watching the news with tears running down my eyes because of what's on the newscast, and it's that's something new for me. The physical showing of emotion. The the fact that when you're doing things like this, and I'm speaking now with government employees, with government parliamentarians, and at some points, and that puts a stress on it, and you're thinking of, I know that word. What word am I looking for? And you're having to think how to rephrase the conversation because you cannot think of a simple word. Like I could be looking at the laptop where you're using for today's recording and think, I I know I should know what it's called, but because of the pressure of all the other things in the environment, I cannot think of the word laptop, and or I choose the wrong word. You know, there are you, so it's learning all these things. But and as Maisie has already alluded to, my reactions, emotions to the family have changed. I have slammed more doors in the 4 years after my stroke than I've slammed in the 50 odd years before the stroke. And that was just, you have to learn to accept that the person you are post stroke is not the person you were 5 seconds before the stroke. You have changed completely. There is a grieving process that some stroke survivors will talk about it. You have to grieve for the person you were before you can accept the person you have become, and that's an emotional challenge to people as well. So it's all this bit of other things that my motor skills. If I'm tired, I become clumsy. I will drop things, and or and things like that. So yeah, there is a whole new person that you have to learn to be after your stroke. Now, I am fortunate. I can go out and have a walk. I can talk. There are stroke survivors that are learning how to live life without the basic functions that they had 5 seconds before their stroke. So that is where when we're talking about research now is the physical side. Everybody understands you need rehabilitation, you need can you write, can you sign your name, can you do all these things? That is important, but also the important bit is learning actually what is happening in the brain after a stroke. Because stroke fatigue, we have changed. We've been involved in giving advice to the Scottish Government work employees and also Scottish Government itself, saying, it used to say Scottish Government in their pathway for stroke, it was a case of that stroke fatigue could happen. It is now says stroke fatigue is commonplace. It's not a big change in words, but it's a big change in emphasis. And that bit of looking, nobody understands what causes stroke fatigue. Why do I still, 4 years after my stroke, still suffer from stroke fatigue? The brain hasn't got any better on that one. So when you both, Mila and Gaia, are talking about where are the symptom or similarities between stroke and dementia, it is that bit of what is actually happening in the brain, because yes, physically we're fine, but it's that whole change in what your brain function has been post-stroke.
Yeah, absolutely. So my work has actually come about from a consultation from actual carers and stroke survivors to say, what are your top priorities? Because I think it's recognizing in stroke research that something physical like a motor impairment is really easy to see. So that's kind of easy to target in a way, because you have an outcome of what's your baseline at this minute in terms of function, and then how can we improve that, and we can measure that again. Something that's cognitive or emotional is a lot harder to try and quantify in a way, and it's also less overt than something that's a motor disability in a way. So it's about shaping how people think about recovery in stroke beyond physical. And it's also recognizably a lot harder to try and study because, as I said, they're more subtle than, a motor deficit, which is quite easy to see if you meet someone that's had a stroke.
It just sounds everything that you told us, Dennis. Thank you so much. Like a very, as Gaia said before, life-changing experience, and also like a very long recovery journey that is full of, ups and downs and everything. But I would just like to bring back to the point that you mentioned before, that your life changed overnight, and that after the stroke you were not the same person you were 5 seconds before the stroke. And this concept of, as you said, the self-grievance process, learning to live with your new self. So I was just curious, Maise, in terms of your impressions on that, because I'm guessing it must have left a huge impact on yourself and the rest of your family. Could you maybe share with us a little bit on how it's affected you?
Yeah, so obviously we've had to learn how to kind of adapt to Dad's maybe new emotions and new anxieties. Definitely took us a good few months to find a way that works best for all of us, and especially Dad. Especially like when he's anxious, he'll just change completely. It'll be up to 99s. He'll start like pacing. And you try your best to find the words to try and chill him out, but you just kind of have to find your own solution. Because Dad's trying to find a solution, but obviously he's not able to find one because he's so anxious. So you just kind of have to try and guide him in the right way. There was a time we were in Switzerland. It was a couple months after your stroke. We were trying to find out how to go into the city and the best way to get into the city. And Dad was like, "Oh, we'll just go on this bus. It was going to cost us like €100 each." My brother was Googling and Dad was up to 99, so he had to walk away. So usually it's like Dad that works out how to get places on holiday. So obviously we've had to adapt and change. Like, Dad probably gets too stressed about it now, so we've kind of taken the role. And when he gets tired, you just kind of just maybe hint at going to bed. You're quite good at,
I've learned that one.
yeah. There's when he gets tired, you'll get grumpier and grumpier. You'll get that frown. It's a very characteristic frown, lots of lines. So when he gets that frown, you just kind of push him to go to bed. But one of the main things that we've tried not to do is put words in his mouth. So when he's struggling to find the words, we used to at the start try and help him and find the words, but he would get more and more frustrated with that. So we've just kind of let him do it himself. Like, it might take a while. We know what he's trying to say anyway, but we don't want to make him feel like he's like struggling. So we just let him be, and eventually it may feel like minutes from trying to find words, but it's not. So we just need to always sit back, just be patient, and wait for him to say the words that he's looking for. But it's a lot of patience that we've had to work on. But in the end, I think we found a way so that we've all coped to try and cope with it.
Yeah. No, thanks so much again for sharing. 'Cause, from listening from what you were saying, Maise, it sounds like you almost have to learn to communicate again, like in terms of, some things that Dennis might express differently, or if, recognizing maybe when he is anxious or when he wants to go to bed and he might not express that, but there's sort of like small triggers that you might pick up that obviously are new to before Dennis, you had your stroke, which is a lot to try and refocus and have everyone kind of on board. So that sounds like quite a big challenge in terms of emotional for all the family, really.
Especially with me, like I live at home. I'm the only one that lives at home now with mum and dad, and I usually like lying on the couch on my phone, and I don't really pay attention to it. But obviously when like dad's trying to talk to me or something, kind of just keep my head down and still on my phone, and he's just like staring at me and being like, Maisie, and I'm like, I've answered you, but obviously I'm not communicating to him like how he wants. Like, he wants me to like look at him and just say like good night to to his face rather than saying good night to my phone. But yes, we're definitely as a family had to work on our like communication after the stroke, because it's completely changed.
Yeah, it sounds like you're almost processing two things: the stroke, but then also this change in the family dynamics and the relationships.
Yeah, and I think from a stroke survivor's point of view, you think you're doing everything correctly because that's what your brain tells you you're doing is correct. And in actual fact, it is probably that bit of it is not correct. And it's the people that love and care for you that are telling you it's not correct. So it to an extent it can be a a constant spiral of am I right, am I wrong, and why am I wrong and whatever. And that's all part of what we were talking about, the the brain understanding, trying to learn, that this is the new norm, and the old norm isn't going to happen again. And so there, and it is things like, after this podcast, everybody else will go away and do things. I'll probably go for an hour's sleep because of stroke fatigue. And and I now know these things are what's needed, and we'll do it. Whereas right at the start, it was no, let's do this, let's do that, and whereas now it's no, I've been on for an hour getting the podcast all organized. I'll just go for an hour's sleep.
Yeah, I guess it's adapting to like your new limits and
Yeah.
kind of pushing the boundaries almost at the start to see how far you can push yourself without obviously penalizing yourself in a way, and just getting to know, I guess, what you said before, a new self, because you are different compared to before.
Yeah, and it's how your brain copes with different stress levels. I mean, I'm a retired accountant. I knew stress at work and had my coping mechanisms. It's different now. Things that stress you are less of a magnitude, but they cause you the same amount of stress, and it is just coping with that side of it as well.
Go for it, Mila.
No, I was just gonna say that obviously you can never be prepared for something like this, but these new limits and these things that you experienced, did you ever hear about them from someone? Either going to your doctors in the hospital or the family practitioner or Maise, I don't know if you managed to find maybe some support groups online or in person. Was there anyone to kind of guide you a little bit through the process, or was it for every single thing you had to reach a boundary and then say, all right, I need to stop here, can't do this, or I need to do that?
I think where I am now with being involved with as part of the voice of lived experience, yes, I understand where I am now. My first real aspect of getting to understand me was actually taking part in and this is a big misnomer, the mild stroke research at the University of Edinburgh. I understand that it's called mild stroke because there is no motor deficiencies, but it is still a misnomer calling it a mild stroke. Every stroke is unique. It is not mild, but that's how the whole stroke side of aspects are categorized. And it was actually just working with some of the stroke research staff at the University of Edinburgh that I came in across a lot of the things that I thought was just me. And I think it's from that point that I've developed into here we are 4 years later, now working with both yourself and Gaia and others, and it's certainly been an interesting journey, not always smooth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's about recognizing that, again, going back to like something that's very overt, like a physical disability, an emotional or a cognitive disability is just as important as a physical one. And there's definitely needs to be more support, more recognition about these other aspects of recovery that go with stroke than just the physical. And I think, yeah, hopefully that will come in time. There's already a shift in the research of how the funders are thinking about these things, obviously involving people like yourselves, Denis, and Maise, carers and family of stroke survivors, to tease out basically how can we actually help you, as opposed to we'll follow on from decades of research that we've already done. And that kind of leads very nicely into our next question. So thinking a wee bit more broadly, so one of the topics we wanted to talk to you both about today is this interaction, or this need for more interaction between people like yourselves, so with lived experience, and researchers like myself and Mila, or even other stakeholders. And the idea that how this partnership can be invaluable in terms of exchanging knowledge and helping us researchers form new ideas, obviously make more science happen, which would hopefully impact you guys, because ultimately that's what we want to do. And I know, Denis, you mentioned already you have experience of working with government, policymakers and health policies, and researchers, of course. Do you want to maybe share with us one or two examples, maybe one or two experiences that you found most valuable or most rewarding, and that you've interacted with stakeholders or researchers?
I think there's a number of highlights. One was listening to one of the psychological clinicians talking about the work that they are doing with stroke patients. And one of the highlights has been working with one of the psychological clinicians, and their view was that while there are a number of clinicians in Scotland working, the actual going by the ratios, it should be quadruple that number of psychological clinicians in Scotland than there currently is. But that then brought us round to actually, as a lived experience group, talking about it. And we actually felt that the research and the level of psychological care should be brought down to the nursing staff as well, is that they should be asking about your mental health well-being, as well as saying, oh, can you walk 3 paces? Can you move your fingers? And it's all that bit of bringing the actual care, both of physical and mental well-being, down to really the tier 1, tier 2 level, rather than referring it up the way. So that was part of the one of the highlights of actually starting to look at where mental well-being comes into care certainly within Scotland. Now that is now to be spread. At the moment, it is probably a postcode lottery. Now across Scotland, that we hope to move away from that aspect of it just depends where you live, what your mental well-being services, to actually we have a standard across the country. For me as well, other things have been actually having very open and honest conversations with carers, with clinicians, and other stroke survivors about just what all we are going through. And all of us know that each stroke is unique. No one stroke survivor has an identical journey to the next person. So it is not a one answer fits all questions type of condition. And it's making sure that each of us gets the support that we need, whether that be through rehab, through non-cognitive skills, through even, as we've talked about, and is on sexual well-being as well. Because all of these, the motor skills, the emotional skills, the sexual well-being as well, are all things that can affect a stroke survivor and also their carer. But the other side is the things that we've talked about from a carer's point of view is, a lot of the carers are the wife, husband, or partner of the stroke survivor. And at what point do you split? How do you split between primary carer and being partner? And that's also one. So there's a lot of highlights. I'm not quite sure of yeah. Walking 10 miles is a great highlight for me, but for some people, walking 10 meters is a great highlight. So it's that bit of what actually is a highlight. It's it depends on each person, and it depends on their stroke, what they set for goals. So Highlights for me, there are a few, but a lot of it is now ensuring that if somebody in the future has a stroke, that they actually get a better outcome than I do. And if one person gets a better outcome from me, then all of what I've done in the last 3 years has been great. The first year will write off because you're just first year after a stroke, if you excuse the terminology, you just wonder what the hell's happened to you.
No, it's incredible everything that you do, Dennis. And you just keep going and getting involved in more and more things. So, can I ask you, what is your secret? How do you stay motivated to do all these things?
Part of it is I can't say no, which the family shouts at me quite a lot. But no, I look at things that I used to do, and they are no interest to me. I used to spend many hours a week with a youth organisation, and I'm looking to really finish that now. I'm spending about 2 hours a month doing it, and it's not a motivation to me now. My brain has changed as to what motivates me, and it's now, yeah, stroke, working with a local charity trying to relieve food poverty, and my own church are the three things that actually make me motivated now, and all the rest is just noise, and I don't control the noise, so I actually don't want to be part of it now.
No, it's amazing because from what you were saying, it sounds you've managed to turn something that's obviously quite a negative experience to do something really positive, not just for yourself, but for other people. Obviously, as you said, thinking about the future, which I think anyone would say that's a very admirable goal. So thank you so much for some people might have a very different outlook. They're like, I'm just going to carry on and focus on my recovery. And that's, their personal choice. But the fact that you're motivated to help people and get involved is really, really inspiring and admirable.
Especially despite the stroke fatigue, because you were
Mhm.
saying how you struggle with stroke fatigue, and then to then go on and do all these things is just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think, Dennis, that this has helped your recovery in a way? Obviously, being involved and utilizing cognitive skills or even emotional skills to interact with people or sort different problems. Do you think that's helped you in a way recover more fully than if you just said, I'm just going to stay at home and focus on me?
Absolutely. If I had stayed at home, one, I would have driven myself mad, and two, I would have driven the family mad. And it is a release for me, and it's also just who I am. I've always wanted to be involved in helping other people, and it is great now being involved with people who sh- who fully understand what it is to be a stroke survivor. So I can talk to them, and we meet at least once a month, and it is full and frank discussions, and I realize for a lot of things I am blessed, and you know the the things I've got, actually on other people's scale, I'm about 5 or 6, not 10, and they're still doing it. So yeah, it's great. So w- with the researchers, I my view is just for both you, Gaia, Mila, and others that I'm going to be involved with is uh, that bit of, I hope that I bring across why it is so important to understand what is happening in the brain, because you both have met me, and at the start of the meeting, physically, you wouldn't have known it. After 4 hours of being shown your research around the research lab and chatting for hours, you saw the tired me, and that is how what is effect a half day's work has on people. And if that was a highlight, albeit maybe not a half day's work is not a highlight to a lot of people, but to a half day's work of showing you what I can look like at 2 o'clock when I arrived to when I left it just before 6 o'clock in the evening. And I even know there was a significant change in that. So it's these kind of things. Yes, they've helped me understand me, but they've also given me a purpose of why I want to get involved in what I'm doing, and I'm thoroughly enjoying what I'm doing at the moment. And I just need the family occasionally to keep going to me. So, no, Dad, you're not doing this. No, Dad, you've got too much.
They keep you on the right track. That sounds reasonable to me. And speaking of research, Dennis, since you have mentioned it, obviously I know you mentioned you came to the lab to see Mila and I, and we kind of went through what we do here. And obviously you shared your perspective on, like this is how it's affected me. So it'd be great to see, hopefully I'm not paraphrasing, so please do correct me if I'm wrong, that you'd want to see more, research into fatigue, the emotional changes within stroke, and actually understanding, what bits of the brain could be targeted to resolve that. So I'm going to turn to you now, Maise. On a similar note, do you think there's more research, or what would you like to see researched on a more family carer side of things? If you think it does need more support, what would you like to see done?
Yeah, so there's definitely more of a focus on when the stroke survivors got like a physical weakness. So I did my dissertation in uni on the impact on the family when a stroke survivor doesn't have any weakness. So they're basically not back to baseline, but pretty much they're normal. And that was the first time that I kind of found things that related to like me and my family. Um, and I had to like go through academic journals just to find like people that have gone through the same experiences as us. So it was quite good, obviously, doing my dissertation on that topic. But yeah, so it would be good for more research and more support for families of stroke survivors that don't have any physical weaknesses or any like impairments at all. Because I don't think there's many out there. I've not come across any.
Just on that, the two charities in Scotland do provide peer support groups and carer support groups, but actually it's when the stroke survivor leaves hospital, you get a lot of information about things that aren't relevant, or it is given to the stroke survivor and they are in such a state of confusion at that point that you need to tell them about 4 or 5 times what is actually being offered, and not just the clinician is saying, oh, you can go home now, and this is some information for you. All you hear is you're going home and you forget the rest. And it's that bit of how do we make sure that the resources are out there, but it is how do people not spend hours trawling the internet to look for what care or support is local and whatever. But it's also the aspect of everything that is said to the general public, certainly in the UK, is about the physical aspect of stroke. FAST, that we mentioned at the start, is about face, it is about arm and legs, it's about speech, it's what people can see within the first 10 seconds of them meeting you. What is not known to public in general is that the effect of new emotions, of anxiety, of just all the non-motor side, the cognitive side that is a deficiency in the public knowledge of stroke across the UK. It's also where we need to bolster the rehabilitation side of stroke, and the physical side is you will get an occupational therapist to come in and show you how to do all the skills that you need to do to get home, and that's climbing the stairs, being able to put the kettle on. And I say this on the basis that Maise's sister is an occupational therapist working with elderly mental health. So that's dementia sufferers in the northern part of Scotland, and it's all the physical skills, and it is not about, for stroke survivors, there is a depletion in service on what is the other side of it, the things that you don't need to be able to do to leave hospital, like climb stairs so you can get to a toilet, like make a cup of tea, like being able to put the microwave on. We Some of us can manage that, but we can't manage other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to, I guess, the common theme of today, that it's about, a shift in the perception of what is stroke. That's more of a complete picture. It has other elements apart from motor, and obviously the effect on the individual, but as well as the family, that has to be recognized, and things to be implemented to support that.
Even, I guess, thinking of how some of these symptoms might overlap across different diseases, because at the moment I think we tend to box things: motor deficit, stroke, memory problems, dementia, and so on. But I guess a lot of these resources and groups could then be shared if we just viewed it a bit more well-rounded.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yes, my memory is not as good as it was, and I've probably done it in this podcast, but chosen the wrong word from the library of to when I've meant to say something, and I've used a word that sounds or similar, but no doubt I'll be excused that.
But yeah, no doubt with these kinds of interactions, the future of stroke research is looking bright. So I think, just as a final point, go into the topic of future. What's next for both of you? Just in terms of, things that you plan to achieve, maybe some of your involvement with these lived experience groups, or any other kind of level.
I think for me it's carry on where we are. That there is part of me, and I'm going to, at the end of the year, take a bit of a step back from the lived experience group, because my stroke was 4 years ago. Things move on, and there has to be new space for new stroke survivors to come in and give their experience, and with a changing environment in stroke care. So there's part of me that thinks I've said enough, and I've passed on information, but I've also been involved in a group that has had a significant input into to government thinking. So will I carry on supporting research work and stuff? Yes, I will do, because I'm a stroke survivor, and I want to be involved in that. And there will be other opportunities that will come up for working with people like yourselves, Gaia and Mila. So I look forward to that. But I don't expect to be the voice of lived experience, working and doing as many hours for all of the rest of my life. So I'm not quite sure what the next challenges will be. We'll wait and see what comes along.
For sure. And how about you, Maise? What do you think the future holds for you? And what are your hopes in terms of the future of stroke research and rehabilitation?
Well, to carry on supporting my dad in everything that he does, and obviously telling him to go to bed when he needs to. And just keep we've got good links to the Scottish Charities for Stroke. We keep fundraising for them and just hope that research keeps moving along, and especially for the mental health side of stroke, we just see what the future holds, basically.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it was a real pleasure hearing from you both, but I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. So if you just can't get enough of this topic, please visit the Dementia Researcher website where you will find the full transcript of today's podcast, also our biographies, blogs, and much more on this topic and also on the topic of dementia research. I would like to thank our incredible guests, Denis and Maise. I think we touched on so much today. We spoke about so many topics. And as we said, importantly, even though, we centered it around stroke, these are really things and conversations that are important ones to be had in any research setting, we think. And yeah, we are Mila and Gaia, and you've been listening to the Dementia Researcher podcast.
Brought to you by dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk in association with Alzheimer's Research UK, Alzheimer's Society, Race Against Dementia and the Alzheimer's Association, bringing you research, news, career tips and support.